Hey guys, this is Tyler here. It is December. I'm here in Estonia, and I'm going to discuss with you guys why dating apps are a complete disaster for Generation Z MGTOW guys. And as we know here, dating apps aren't anything new. We obviously had eHarmony and Match.com from 20 plus years ago, and over time they eventually evolved and became mobile. Also, they became more concentrated for younger demographics because the developers and company CEOs realized that this younger demographic was more lucrative, interest level was much higher. There's a much larger base of people that would sign up for these apps, and that's at which point it started to evolve into current dating apps like Tinder and Baidu and Bumble and many other apps over time have came about from this. There was certainly a golden age for these dating apps, especially if you were a millennial or even a younger generation X. In certain countries, I think there was a lot more opportunity, and there was a window for many more types of guys than currently. If we look at in some countries, there wasn't as high of a concentration of men to women on these apps. Over time, of course, due to many factors, many guys being pushed out of the dating market, a higher rate of failed relationships / marriages, a higher level of demands on behalf of the women, in general, just a lower level of integrity within dating. With this, of course, we saw many more men migrate to these dating apps. I mentioned in previous videos that contrary to popular belief, if you look at the ratio of men to women on many of these apps, there's actually a much higher percentage of men on most of the apps. I think even Bumble, which is actually an app that's more designed for women. You see this common trend here, and it's a disaster for most guys. They get onto these apps and they don't have success due to this, among other reasons. And we saw this dating rule of the 80-20 rule that became more common, I think, in the early 2000s. It gradually became more of the 90-10 or even 95-5 rule nowadays. When we look at an app where it may only have 35% to 65% women to men ratio, and then when we also take in consideration that 95% of the attention is directed to 5% of the guys, yeah, most guys are not going to have a chance on these apps, and they're not going to find any kind of dates. What's happened on a lot of these apps, and this is in many countries, this isn't just in the US and Canada, this is common in Estonia, and much of Europe, Australia, South America. Most guys get on here and they may or may not get some matches, exchange some messages, and then no response. It's over. This is a very common trend now. Quite different, of course, too, when we look at historical, like eHarmony and Match.com. And this is also the problem when you have price point of these apps is very low. So there's a very high quantity of people that can sign up for these apps. eHarmony and Match.com, I believe, were in the ballpark of $100 to $300 a month minimum. And so right from that, automatically entailed that a huge percentage of the population was going to be on those applications. Many men, as the past 5 to 10 years have progressed from more the Millennials to Generation Z, who are now in their teens to early 20s, these people obviously are gradually becoming a bigger percentage of participants on these apps. From this, we've seen that they even have less success than many millennial guys. Now, there was a period, if you're a millennial guy, you could go to certain countries like Russia or Ukraine, maybe Belarus, and you could be successful on one of these apps and be a pretty average guy, especially if you were foreign. There was like an arbitrage opportunity, as it's known, and it was like geo-arbitrage. That was something a guy could take advantage of if they were willing to travel to one of those countries. I won't lie, I myself took advantage of that opportunity. I went to Russia like 4 years ago. the first time, and that wasn't the only thing, honestly, but it was one thing in my favor. Unfortunately, now that geo arbitrage doesn't exist like it did before, and in these cities, there also has been a much higher increase of foreign guys. They kind of realized the same thing I realized, also that the quality of young women also declined with that, and also less of them were as serious as they were before on these applications. And I think that's one of the big issues now, is that with Generation Z, the younger women, just even less serious about this than the Generation Y. And some of them, I also noticed a trend that many of them are just using these apps as more of a type of social media. Baidu, Tinder, great examples here. It's more of a social media or Instagram tool just to get a bunch of likes and to boost their ego. Guys from Generation Z, being that they've grown up with technology, they can realize these trends faster and understand that these apps aren't going to work. And so many of them have just simply signed off or just shut down their accounts because they know it's a futile activity. I've been reading many articles recently in US, Canada, and what I'm seeing is that the number of Generation Z guys that have not even had any kind of romantic encounter, just kissing someone, is higher than it's ever been, honestly, in history. It's unbelievable when I look at some of these statistics. And keep in mind, are these statistics 100% accurate? Probably not. In fact, they may even be worse, because I think a lot of guys have more shame having to admit these things and stating that they don't have any kind of success in this respect. But this number is higher than ever, and it just continues to get higher, unfortunately. And what we're seeing is, we saw with the millennial demographic, with men and women, especially in the Western countries, in the Anglosphere in Australia, is that the notch count of the average woman is much higher often than the average man today. And it's probably the same with Generation Z. It's very hard getting accurate statistics, especially in these younger age ranges, but as time goes on, I think we'll get a better picture of this concept. Obviously, this notch count, this is really screwed up. Just consider that, historically speaking, if you went back to like the 1940s, 1950s, it would typically be the guy that may have a few notches before they were married. Often, it was actually a completely untainted, like, virgin woman that a guy was married. Maybe they would have one or two prior relationships, but they weren't having like 10 or 20 or 30 or more. This almost never happened, and this would have been considered like very used goods a long time ago. And yet these ladies existed. They were probably working in a certain line of work that's existed for many centuries, that I think all of us understand what it is, but this wasn't like half of the population or whatever it is. And this trend, of course, is becoming very common in so many countries now. Also, the expectations that men have to bring forth on these dating apps now is more than ever before. I mean, I see crazy articles about guys needing to be in helicopters and to be driving Lambos and Ferraris. Just crazy, very expensive lifestyle items that have to be present. And it's even worse than, say, 10 years ago. Maybe 10 years ago, if you were flashing like a Mercedes or a Beamer or something, that looked pretty good. That would get your foot through the door with many gals. But now it's like, you need to be on a whole different level. It's not realistic for most guys, and this just it worsens with each year. Also, remember that more girls now are brought up in single parent households than ever before. This is so high, and this is no question one of the biggest reasons why the level of respect in dating in general, but also dating apps, relationships, marriage, has just plummeted, is because girls now are not brought up by fathers. They don't have any real father figure in the home, and it's so high in some countries. It's over 50-70%. I think in Estonia it's over 50%. It's ridiculous, honestly. It's absolutely absurd. And the number just gets higher and higher. As governments take the place of a father in the home, this will just continue to worsen. If they don't respect a father figure, they are not going to respect a guy who essentially, historically, took the same role. This is what a guy was a long time ago in relationships or marriages. If you ask any older guy, unfortunately my grandfather has passed away, but when I spoke to him about this, I recall him telling me this story about when he met my grandmother, my paternal grandmother. At this point in time, this was like in the 1940s. When he sought to marry her, he didn't just impress her, he had to impress her dad and have a good relationship with her dad. And that's how it used to be, and especially in certain societies. You didn't impress the lady, you impressed the father. That shows you the dichotomy here in how society was designed. And they understood, obviously, that the guy was taking the role of the father. Now there's no father in the picture, so there's no conception of what the guy is. And that's where we're at now. Probably will get worse. And this is another factor. It's part of this low trust factor also. I've talked about this before. That is more common now with younger people than before. Another thing also, there's a lot of science behind the abundance factor. There's kind of this abundance construct in people's mind. This is a big part of sales and marketing. Advertisers create kind of a sense of abundance. When you're selling, when you create this abundance construct, it often sells to people well. Much of the studies so focus on the science of abundance from the other end. The area though it doesn't often focus on is the sense of abundance for the younger ladies. They overestimate the number, the quantity of high quality guys. And this is more of an issue, I think, than people realize. I've done some research in this, and what I found is because this is so common now, when we see, especially with older millennials, many older millennial women now are very unhappy. They're complaining about not having met a spouse, not being married, not meeting Mr. Perfect. And I think a lot of this is because there was this over sense of abundance in the relationship marketplace. They sense that there were so many of these, in their heads, high value guys. There were a handful. Many of them obviously weren't seeking to marry her. And then they think that there's many of them around, because of course they're going to be the most sought out when they're in their younger years, their prime years. They get past those prime years, and then they realize this abundance isn't really this isn't real. This is made up, and this is how these applications are designed. It creates a warped perception of how many quality guys are and what areas are also valued. It's not just the net worth and how many houses or what type of car the guy drives. What are their values? What character does the guy have? None of this is valued today, and this is a huge problem we see on these dating apps. And the last thing, as I've spoken about before, is just the low trust factor that is more prevalent with younger Generation Z. And this, I think, is also very reflective of the demographic norms now, especially in many Western countries. It will be very interesting to see how the next 10, 15 years play out with younger generation on dating apps, but I would say it doesn't look very good. Give me your feedback below, and thank you.